There's something about the ocean which sparks our imaginations. It offers a sense of adventure which you don't get on land. What I knew I wanted to do was engage more people with the ocean. I wanted to get more people out there so they could see for themselves how important this is.
Here in Britain, we're incredibly lucky to have a coastline that is home to some of the most wild and diverse landscapes that you can find anywhere on this planet. And we're also lucky that you're actually never too far away from the sea. But how well do we actually know our oceans and the impact that we are having on them? And why should we care?
The ocean is absolutely critical in our fight against climate change. We are having profound impacts upon it as a result. We need to learn more about the ocean. We need to rekindle our relationship with the ocean and have a greater personal understanding of the importance of the sea.
Oliver Beardon set up Sail Britain to get more people sailing and reconnecting with the ocean. Leading trips around the coast of the UK, Oliver combines sailing with his love for the creative arts, using his boat to host masterclasses, workshops, and artistic residentials. This year, for example, Sail Britain is in the Western Isles of Scotland, which is a truly magical place.
I think it's really important to champion the place you have close to home. We live in a geographically, socially diverse country with incredible wildlife, and most people don't know that.
After studying architecture for 9 years, Oliver found that office life was not for him. And his story of getting Sail Britain to launch is a great inspiration to us all. He is proof that it's never too late to change direction in life, and how it can be possible to turn your passions into something meaningful and with purpose.
Only you can make your dreams come true. There's no good waiting for someone else to somehow facilitate. Just go out and find how to do it yourself and stick to it.
In this conversation, we talk about Sail Britain's inception, what life is like on Oliver's boat, and how the state of our oceans is an integral part to our life on land. I hope you enjoy this episode number 1 of Great British Adventures. Thank you, Oliver, for sharing your time with me today, especially as this is still a new thing and I've not released anything. So I feel like you're taking a risk on something which may or may not be a thing. So I'm really grateful for you to...
Oh, not at all. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I think when we met a few months ago, I knew you were exactly the type of person I wanted to champion on this podcast. I think your first of all, your adventurous spirit to jump off a track in life which you were set on and to pursue something which took a great passion of yours and you combined it with sharing it with a diverse range of people.
Yes, indeed.
I'm really excited to chat to you.
Great. Well, be delighted to share with it.
You are or have been a sailor your whole life.
Yes. Not my whole life. Sailing was something that came to me when I was about 16. I had an opportunity to go down to Dover Water Sports Centre on a Thursday afternoon with school, and we were pushed out into the harbour in tiny little boats in toppers, which is just basically a fat surfboard with a sail and one rope and a rudder. It's very simple. And we weren't given much of an introduction. It was just straight out, simple enough to go and learn. And
what got you into sailing? What got you to that point to actually be pushed out onto the water?
Yeah, I think I'd always had an interest in the sea from a very early age. My dad had built a boat, a small one in the 70s, but he didn't really know how to sail, and it was all a bit of a minor thing, really. But he had an interest in the sea, and we spent family holidays by the sea. And it was something which always fascinated me. So yeah, when this opportunity came up to learn how to sail for a term instead of playing hockey on Thursday afternoons, it was something I jumped at, and it was wildly exciting. That thrill of being out on the water, powered by the wind, it was just the best thing I'd ever done by far, and I've never looked back.
There is something very special about being on a craft on open water and just feeling the power of nature propel you along, knowing that there's there's no motor involved, and that it's just natural forces that are transporting you.
Yeah.
Is an incredible feeling. I've learned to sail when I was younger myself. I don't really do much with it at the moment, but the times when I have sailed, that when that boat just lifts with the wind and you are feeling that power take you through water, it's a feeling that you can't really get on land.
No, it's not. It's there's a magical moment on any sailing trip when, with the big boats I sail now, we use the engine to get out of harbour and to get in a position to raise the sails and instruct everyone how that works. When the sails are up and we bear away from the wind and you can turn the engine off and the boat just accelerates under sail, it's a very special moment at the start of any trip.
Do you think it was lucky that you live in a country like the UK where we have access to coastal waters, that sailing was always going to be prominent in your life?
I think that's true. I think, nowhere is that far from the sea. I think even the furthest point from the sea in the British Isles is 70 miles. And we have a lot of inland waters. So I actually did most of my early sailing on a gravel pit near Canterbury. And and that was a safe place for, a beginner to learn and to make mistakes without getting it too badly wrong. And then when I went to university, I joined the sailing club, and that was on the sea. So, and that was bigger boats, and it was going on week-long trips, weekend trips sometimes, to far destinations. And I think that's what you don't get on a lake, is you get a sense of actually being able to go somewhere under your own steam, which is a very exciting thing. So often when we travel, we're constrained by schedules, timetables, tickets, that sort of thing. The difference with a boat is you're out there under your own steam, relying on your own skills, and you're completely free. And it's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah. And was this like multi-day tours you were doing?
With my work or with...
Oh, so with when you were at university?
Oh, yes. So the University Sailing Club was a very sort of welcoming, down to earth bunch of people. And we'd go out all year round, in the winter mostly for weekend trips, and then the boat would go off for a summer tour, which might be around the British Isles on several occasions. And people would join along the way, usually for a week or so.
Yeah.
And then the crew would change at the weekend. One crew would travel home, another crew would pick up the baton, and on we go. And that allowed us to get to some reasonably far-flung places, which was a great privilege.
I suppose I've never done a multi-day tour by boat, but I was lucky enough to sleep on a boat once the night before I went on a sailing regatta with my old work. And I giggled like a little school kid with excitement, knowing that I was sleeping in a little bunk inside this boat, which was just moored in the harbour.
Yeah.
I thought it was the best experience ever, just to be sleeping on a boat rather than a hotel.
Yeah, I think it's a very unique thing. I think for most people it's way outside the comfort zone, or if it's not outside the comfort zone, it's well into the excitement zone. It moves. There's weird noises you've not heard before. There's the whole sort of, beneath me is water, not land, and that's,
you're anchored basically in open water.
Well, it depends where you are. I mean, we with my work we tend to stop every evening in some sheltered loch or inlet or river. And so the boat is stable and going nowhere.
Right.
But yes, it's in the open, yeah.
And there's some moments when you're not anchored, your boat is moving and you have to sleep, which is the case.
It depends. So if you're doing a longer passage, we can travel at, 6-7 nautical miles an hour in good conditions. So, you if your passage is more than, 120 nautical miles, then inevitably some of it's going to be overnight. And we do occasionally we have done a few overnight passages, yeah. And that's actually a really magical thing to be out on the open ocean, often far from land, in the middle of the night. It's it gives you lots to think about, for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who haven't had the chance to sail or to learn to sail don't think that they are made for the water, and I think that's probably just a case of access. And I think sailing is something that can be traditionally quite expensive. It takes a lot of equipment and skills and knowledge to learn. So in those early days when you were learning, I suppose it shows the importance of investing in the youth to get them with basic skills,
Yeah.
basic sailing skills.
Yeah.
How important is that within the UK?
That's enormously important. And, sailing traditionally has been a privileged thing to do. And, there are reasons for this. It's a class thing, but it boils down to money. Maintaining a boat in, a violent and corrosive environment is quite expensive. So, yachting, there's all sorts of connotations with yachting, which I'm sure, most people listening to this will be aware of. But I'm keen to break that down because it being out on the water, it's just like anything else in life. It's about practice. It's about the ability for someone to hand you skills and then for you to hand those skills on to others. It's no different from playing any other kind of sport in that respect. But yeah, what I do with my work with Sail Britain is to get people out onto the water in a sort of more community-minded environment and spread the cost of that to make it more accessible. But I think we have so much wonderful water and wonderful coastline in the British Isles that it's really nice to see what sailing charities are doing, what the RYA is doing to get more people into sailing in an accessible and joyful manner.
Yeah.
I hope that with time, things will break down, and other countries which have a strong maritime history, for example, the Netherlands, it's much more egalitarian there. It's quite normal to have a boat. The boats are actually mostly quite small, quite modest. It's not the sort of class thing which it tends to be in the UK, and that's nice to see. So it can be done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose humanity in its history has always had a connection to the ocean, whether that's for food or for transport or exploration. But what is it? What draws you to being an ocean man? Because I know there's typically a type of person who gets twitchy on land because they want to be on the sea.
Yeah.
Are you that type of person?
No, I don't think I am.
Right.
I think, we're all land creatures, and I'm very much a land creature. But the sea offers a sense of adventure which you don't get on land. It's, you stand on the beach and you look out at the horizon. There's something about the ocean which sparks our imaginations, perhaps because it's so featureless. There are no hills, no valleys, no trees. It's just on a nice day, it's flat and blue and seems to be infinite. And this, I'm sure, we'll pick up a bit later on, but I think it really gets the imagination going in a way which land adventures in some way don't. People have always been fascinated by stories from the sea, exotic people, strange cargoes, tales of adventure, sea monsters, the amount of literature, poetry, and cultural heritage which we have from the ocean is, should stand as an example of why we're so fascinated by it.
There's a mystery that surrounds it, I suppose, as well,
Yeah.
because there's a whole world hidden underneath it.
That's true, yeah. It's not our realm, And I think that the human psyche has always been driven to exploration, and perhaps like space more in the 20th century, the ocean was the ultimate frontier. It was somewhere we were reliant only on our skills and our shipbuilding abilities. If we were left in the ocean, well, we drown. That's it. But yes, there's a mystery of what's beneath, and tales of sea monsters and ghost ships. This sort of thing is all quite fascinating. But there's also a very contemporary reason why we need to be engaging with the ocean because of what lies beneath as well.
What is it that draws you to being out on the ocean personally?
For me, it's about people. I think when you're out on a boat in the wild, as I said, you're independent. You have to rely upon yourself only and your skills, and also upon the people around you. So, you have to rely upon the team. And I really enjoy working with people. I enjoy team projects. I like a social environment. And I think it's really nice to see how people interact as a team on a boat. I wonder if it's something to do with the sort of proximity of our own mortality, People are very aware when they step onto a boat that, we're in a very confined space here, and we are, a couple of meters from certain death if you fall off and don't get rescued. So there's something about that which makes you more aware of your own mortality. But it's also quite exciting, It's because, if you do things properly, it's perfectly safe. And, millions of people enjoy it around the world perfectly safely.
Yeah.
And that's something we take very seriously. But with that framework in place, it really adds to the sense of adventure.
You mentioned you were sailing at university. You were reading architecture.
Yeah.
Which is a path in life which were you set upon at that time?
I think, like many people at the age of 18, 19, going to university, you make an informed guess about what might suit you in life, but you're very ill-equipped to actually make that in any particularly meaningful way.
Yeah, I agree.
I'd always been very creative. I'd always been very practical, and always built. I always had a tree house. When I was a child, multiple tree houses and dens, in fact, and there was an instinct that architecture was something which I would enjoy and be good at, and I enjoyed it. I studied all the way through. I became a fully qualified architect, which is quite a long training.
Yes,
7 years minimum. I did it over 9 years, which is not uncommon, interspersed with periods of work and practice.
Right.
And it was about 6 months after I qualified that I decided that I was coming up to 3 years at the firm I was working for, and when you at that age, you probably want to move on to a different firm, learn something new, have some new experiences of the industry. But I thought, well, I've been doing this for a decade. I'll take 6 months off first, because there's a lot of other ideas I've got which I want to pursue. I want to do more sailing, for example. I want to see more of the British Isles. In my time sailing with university, I saw.
It's incredible that you had a sense of adventure to explore your own country.
I did.
Many people want to go and explore the world.
Yeah. Well,
what was it? Was it because for you, being a sailor, the British Isles was very accessible for you to explore within the 6 months? Was it more big that, or was there some more?
Exactly. It was more accessible to those at university, and we were students. We were relatively inexperienced. I mean, you can sail anywhere in the world, really, but it gets progressively more difficult the further you go. So I wanted to spend some time exploring, what we have here in the British Isles, in my time off, in the 6 months off, and a few ideas about working with people as well. And I went off on lots of crazy adventures. Sailed to the Faroe Islands. I did go abroad further as well, but I did lots of sailing in the UK, particularly in the Western Isles of Scotland, which is actually a very wild place in terms of its landscapes and islands and nature.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's a kind of cut.
These are the Inner Hebrides.
These are the Inner and Outer Hebrides.
Inner and Outer Hebrides. Yeah.
So I came back after 6 months with my head full of ideas and frankly no desire to go back to an office. I think I made a decision sometime during that year off, or 6 months off, summer off, that I wanted to work with people more than I was doing in the office.
Yeah.
I wanted to spend more time outside, and I wanted to work with more meaningful projects. I've always been a very keen environmentalist, and I think aware from a much earlier age that our relationship with nature is very important and a very joyful relationship can be, and that's something I wanted to pursue as well. So I did go back to work for a little while because I ran out of money, but
but this idea was burning in your head.
Stuck.
Yeah, it's the ones that stick are the ones that are usually worth pursuing.
Yeah. I'd always had little schemes here and there about building a small boat or pursuing other dreams, but this one, really stuck.
So you had this love for the ocean, for sailing. You had this love for sharing it with people. And you had the love for doing something purposeful and with meaning, which I suppose is kind of where you are now.
Indeed, yes. I sometimes joke to people that, 8 years later, eight years after I left the office, I'm still on my 6 months off. I'm still learning. I'm still working out how it all goes. And it's been a very joyful, interesting, challenging journey.
Yeah.
I've never worked harder in my life for so little gain in the traditional sense, but I've also never been happier. So
well, the gain in the traditional sense does not account for the gain that you've got as a person.
yeah, exactly.
And the growth and the experiences that you've been able to share with people
Yeah.
over those 8 years.
Yeah.
Which I would argue is a much better gain
Yeah.
than any material or wealth in
Indeed,
terms of
yeah.
financial. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we need a baseline to survive, of course, but we've probably also heard stories of elderly people who are, coming to the end of their lives saying, they wish they'd engaged with more human things, with other people, with family, with things that really matter, rather than spending, 40, 50 years pursuing riches. And
then doing a retirement, which they are physically unable to enjoy because of their ability at that age. Yeah.
I thought, I had a choice. You either pursue your dreams when you're young and fit and able and full of energy, or you wait till you retire. And will you ever be able to retire? At my age, that's looking increasingly unlikely for many people. But also, would I have the energy to do it? Again, questionable. And if that were to be the case, it'd be too late. So for me, it wasn't really a choice. It had to be now.
So you're almost living a retirement in real terms at a much younger age, sailing the ocean on your boat.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm living any kind of retirement. I'm living a very upward trajectory. It's every day is new, every day is exciting, and every day has a very fulfilling future. But yeah, I'm very glad I've taken the step I have, and I would, at the risk of being a bad influence, recommend that actually I think more people could do this.
I think it's an interesting point you've got here. We'll talk about the inception of Sail Britain in a moment, but I think just before we leave this, I think it's the fact that you took some time out of your work to just do some things that you just really wanted to do is so important for people out there who are listening to this, who have that same burning desire, maybe some in the back of their mind, to go and just do something. And that could be travel, it could be something else, it could be trying a different career path. What advice would you give to someone who is having that mindset where they just feel like they could be doing something different that they're passionate about?
Yes, I think everybody can. You have to find your own way of doing it. Something that somebody said to me quite early on, which I've not forgotten, which I think was very good advice, is that only you can make your dreams come true. There's no good waiting for someone else to somehow facilitate. Just go out and find how to do it yourself and stick to it. And maybe also have a plan B, have a plan C. You have your dream, which is plan A. But, in many cases, your plan A is too ambitious, it's overexcited, it's got all sorts of pitfalls, and you learn along the way. So maybe plan B is going to be more realistic. But also, be open to a plan C. I think the whole mentality of making yourself open and available to new ways of doing things is going to be self-perpetuating. That's the most difficult thing. It's getting into that mindset, which is one which says, yes, things are possible.
I think I can relate to that so much in two ways. One, being a creative and having a vision of an idea, and that what that vision is not necessarily what the final product or the final outcome is. It's but the act of doing it is you learn what it might become.
Indeed, yeah.
And until you actually start doing it, you're never actually going to find out what that final outcome is. And hopefully that final result, whatever it is, will be so much more worthwhile than just an idea in your head. But you need to put that work in.
I think so, yeah. And I think it's also important to, allow flexibility in your plan, because, you, as I said, you start out with a vision, but it's almost guaranteed it's not going to end as that vision. You don't know how it's going to end, but having that flexibility allows you to take the best and to drop the things which don't work so well. And it's a constant process of refinement, isn't it?
Yeah. I think with this podcast, I had a vision when I set out in at the start of 2023 was when I had this idea much before this, maybe about a year ago I've had it, but I've sat on the idea working on other projects until the beginning of this year, where I allowed myself the capacity to put the work in to try and get it done. And I had this vision that I would start publishing episodes by my birthday, which was actually last week. Haven't published anything yet. This is the 4th episode that I've recorded, and I think I need to sit on record a few more before I put one out there. But I mean, that was the vision that I had, but I put in the work and I'm doing it, and maybe it's a little bit slower, and I've been struggling to get people to kind of sit down and talk to me initially, because there's only so many people I know who I know well enough who might be able to do a favor for me, but then it's also, I can't really approach people who don't know me, don't know who I am, because who are they to kind of come and talk to someone like me? But I've been able to put the work in, do the episodes. It's gone much slower, and I'm learning along the way. And what I thought I could do with this, I'm learning about how I actually need to do this. And eventually this will get released, and the idea will be somewhat slightly different to what I had at the start, but it will come through.
Yeah.
And
that sounds
it will be
like a
different,
very familiar process.
different to what my dream was at the beginning. But it took me to do the work to figure out what it would actually become at the end. It's likewise for you. If you have this idea, you can't sit on it for long. You just need to go out and do it and work out whether it's something for you.
Yeah. And it's something which I think people think you have to, do a complete flip, quit your job, run off into the sunset, and suddenly everything will be working.
And it will happen overnight. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes years. It takes longer than most people would say it does. And it is, I'm sure, for both of us, it's something which started as a personal passion or an idea. And, when you plant a seed, it's, you're not going to get a full grown plant straight away the next day, are you? So it's a process of growth and of refinement and of supporting yourself, in the meantime, through other things, until you can take that leap. And it might be that, it becomes so much work that you have to take that leap, or you decide that, yes, this could work, and I will do it full time.
Yeah. So you had your 6 months away.
Yeah.
And you came back with something in your mind. What was that vision?
Well, I wasn't quite sure. It was a bit foggy at the start, but what I knew I wanted to do was engage more people with the ocean. Like I said, I was a keen environmentalist, and the ocean was a rising cause. Throughout, since shall we say the 70s, environmentalism has been more land focused. It's about the rainforest, it's about, pollution on land. But by its very nature, ocean research and the ocean cause is much more difficult to access, to get out there. And I was learning a lot about the ocean. I was spending a lot of time on the ocean. I thought, well, this is something I feel very, very strongly about. So I wanted to get more people out there so they could see for themselves how important this is. But I wanted to do it in a different way. We're surrounded by doom loops with the ocean messaging about how terribly negative, our impact on the ocean is. And while largely true, there are also huge causes for optimism. And I wanted to give people a very balanced, view on that. But I also wanted to pursue other ideas, particularly the human aspect. So, taking people out as a team on the boat is an incredibly collaborative thing to do. You have to work as a team. And I'd seen the benefits of this, through working with others, both in practice and on, private sailing trips off my own bat, with friends or university. And I love how people pull together on a boat. They have this sort of collective mentality. It's a team dynamic, which is very, very special, and I think has huge applications for our lives on land. And sail training has been used, for team development, for right through from the Sea Scouts to the military to sailing charities working with mental health or with physical disabilities. Yeah,
there's something about being almost marooned on a tiny craft, knowing that you have the purpose to get somewhere. And the only way you're going to do that is if you all come together, because not one person can sail a boat as big as yours, for instance. Yeah. It involves someone being on the other side of the boat to kind of do something, to pull some ropes while you're doing something on this side and someone else is on the other. And there's something about knowing that you all have to work together to get to that goal.
Yeah.
Or else it won't happen.
Exactly. So that was a starting point, really. The goal was in some ways less important. I was most interested in that process, and of, getting people to work together, and we can then figure it out afterwards what the focus was. But I was also very interested in working with artists, because I'm from a creative background myself, and there's a huge amount of maritime history, folklore, and engagement from a creative point of view. And I think artists are obviously very creative people, in not just in a producing creative work, but also in terms of the way they think. And bringing artists and scientists together was something I wanted to do from the get-go. And I think in some ways they think in similar ways, but with different focus. Artists and scientists are both looking at perhaps hidden meanings in things, in what's below the surface, not immediately visible.
Typically, there's the scientist has a black and white approach. There's a right and wrong. There's a yes and no.
Yeah.
There's a point on a graph that means something. Whereas the creative is someone who you can see maybe in a range of different shades or colors, and can see things that perhaps aren't as obvious as what is right or wrong, and that actually that there can be two that can coexist in some sense.
Indeed, and I think there's also it's also about communication. There's so much important research going on in the ocean space, which goes into scientific journals, which are largely read by the scientific community and maybe reported on by media organizations. But we all need to have an accessible way of learning about this and taking it on board. And I think when you bring an artist into a research team, for example, you have a link with ordinary people through creativity, through different ways of translating data, for example, or making something new of what's behind the issue.
Yeah,
in a very interesting way and a very productive way.
I suppose it's also about the importance of having diverse teams in life or in the workplace, or not just having people within your own bubble. So if you're having all scientists who have all studied the same things and had the same degrees, all working on one project, they're all seeing something pretty much in the same way. And it takes someone who's had a different mindset in life and a different experience and a different way of learning to come in and actually say, I can see this from a completely different angle from you. And the two people can learn from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think diversity in any kind of team is a really good thing. And I've seen that in practice now. And it's exceeded my expectations.
So you had this idea to share the ocean with artists, with scientists. You need a boat.
Yep.
Did you have a boat at the time?
No. This was the one really big fly in the ointment. Boats, such as the one we had at university, was way out of my, what I would be able to afford myself. And it's
what are you talking in terms of that?
That was sort of eight people or so, sort of 38 foot yacht.
Okay.
But you've got to start somewhere. So one of these, this early piece of advice I had, that you've got to start somewhere. Maybe you start with your plan C, get any boat.
Right.
So what I did is we hired a small open boat, a 20-foot open boat on the Norfolk Broads for 4 days. And I took a bunch of friends who'd never met, but I knew all of them, and I knew they all had interesting ideas to potentially tap into. And we sailed, we cooked, we slept under the stars for 4 days out in the wilds, and it was a very joyful experience. It was really nice to see how that team dynamic developed, and we just brainstormed, how do we engage people in a meaningful way with the ocean, with community, with each other, with the environment, and bring that back in a way which we can share, in a way which is translatable for everybody. We don't all have an access to the ocean, and that is that's virtually impossible. But we can translate and inspire and share stories. So how do we make this as widely accessible as possible. So that was the starting point. And thereafter, this was what I was doing this in my annual leave, essentially, while I was working. And I ran a few more experimental trips, 1 or 2 on the sea in a small boat on the East Coast, and sailing the creeks and estuaries of Suffolk and mostly Suffolk, Suffolk and Essex. And it all seemed to go quite well. People had good feedback. It was interesting. The ideas were free flowing, and we all had a good time. So far, so good.
It's great that in that initial trip that you took, you said your friends, but not only you use them because they're people you knew, but also you use them in a sense to help develop your idea.
Yeah.
And you weren't willing to, you were very willing, to bring in other people to help develop that. It wasn't kind of a single-minded approach. And that kind of plays very much in part of the spirit of who you are in engaging with people and making sure that it's inclusive experience and that all thoughts are considered.
Yeah.
Is that a personality type of you?
Possibly. I'm quite sociable by nature. I'm interested in other people's ideas, and I believe in diversity. So I think from the start, it was never going to be, just about me. It had a starting point that, I felt I needed to improve my life through doing more meaningful work, but there was no way I could do that on my own. And besides, the potential for involving other people was enormous. And to bring other ideas on board, to hear people's points of view, to let them contribute, for it to become a community, was a really exciting thing for me. And that was in some ways a founding principle of Sail Britain, and it remains the same to this day. That's something which has remained the same throughout the whole past sort of 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I think that's testament, to who you are as a person, that you were very willing at the very beginning to include people into shaping what the idea might become, and it wasn't just a single-minded approach.
Yeah, it's important to be inclusive of people's ideas as well as other forms of inclusivity.
Yeah, there's something very scientific about your approach. It's about let's test it first. You didn't just go out and buy the boat and say, "This is my idea, I want to do it."
Yeah,
it was let's start small, small steps, and test the idea, and incubate it so that hopefully it might grow into something bigger. So where did it go from those first few trips?
So yes, you're absolutely right. I had a great instinct to go out and buy a boat and just sail off into the sunset with loads of wonderful people. But I checked myself. I said, actually, this would be a terrible risk. It's not yet proven, and the costs involved are massively prohibitive. So but I did go on the search for a boat to hire for a longer period. After a few experimental trips chartering boats, I thought, well, maybe I can get a boat for the whole season, and then I don't take on the ownership costs, but I pay a weekly fee, which we can spread equally between people, to make it more manageable. And I was very lucky to be put in touch with a sailing charity in Scotland who had a boat they weren't really using, and they were delighted that I was coming along with a program and lots of ideas, and they liked what I was doing, and so they agreed to let me have the boat for 8 weeks in 2018, and I put out a call. We got social media channels going. We spoke to lots of people, and lots of people contributed and helped, and we went on a wonderful 8-week cruise of the Western Isles with various creative, cultural, and environmental projects, and had a lot of fun. It was great, and again, good feedback. It was more of the same, but more so. It was going further afield. It was more adventurous. It was more involved. I got also the first glimpse that this was going to be incredibly hard work, but I was totally up for it.
Yeah.
So we did the same next year. But we did 16 weeks, which was...
What was happening in the middle, in between these times off the water?
I was doing little bits of work to keep myself afloat.
You're still architect by trade of some sort?
Not anymore.
Ah, okay.
It's not something you can do part-time.
Right.
Really. I will always have an interest in architecture. But yes, I was doing little bits of work here and there. I was doing a lot of planning, a lot of outreach, a lot of social media, and working very hard on where this was going, because it was demanding a lot more of my time now.
Yeah.
So the next season it was me full time, and we went out for 16 weeks in 2019. And
Same boat?
Same boat, yeah. So I chartered it for longer, but of course I had more experience that it works, and so could take a bigger risk.
In terms of
just the cost of chartering it,
right?
There's no way I could afford to charter it for 16 weeks by myself. But providing we get enough people to come to, the shared cost, comes down a lot, and it becomes a lot more, a lot more accessible. And then at the end of 2019, the charity, who, as I mentioned, weren't really using the boat very much, wound up. And the boat moved to new owners, and I needed to find a new way forward, which, got interrupted in 2020 by something which we all remember all too keenly. The pandemic was a shock.
Yeah.
Because by this point, Sail Britain was my full-time thing, and
And you just got it to launch, in a sense.
I just got it to launch.
Momentum was going in the right direction, yeah.
It looked like 2020 would be the year when everything really took off in terms of ideas, in terms of a really good program, and greater independence. But I think I replanned the 2020 program 3 times up until about, the first quarter of the year.
Yeah.
When this thing came along in China, I thought, this might lose the first 2 or 3 weeks of my program at this rate. So I'll push as much back.
No one ever really knew what the future was.
Well,
really.
no.
It's all great in hindsight to see that it took 2 years off our lives. But at the time, was this going to be 2 months, 3 months, 6 months?
Yeah.
No one knew.
Yeah, but it was clear that I, for my own well-being, had to just stop fighting. This was my dream as well as my livelihood. And to see that all crumble was extremely hard on me personally. But I think, I admitted that, it was just going to be a down year, and there's nothing I could do about it. And the only way to survive was just to chill out, which I did for a couple of months. And the weather was quite nice those first few months of lockdown. But the idea was still there. And I had a choice, I guess. One was to...
So it's a great mentality to have, I think, knowing that you'd put in so much work and that everything was disrupted. It quite could be, some people would panic, some people would threat, and would be working, maybe 3 times as hard to try and squeeze something out. But it's almost if you had like mentalities like, you know what, the day will come when this can set sail again. I don't need to worry at the moment.
Yeah.
That day will come, which is a really great mentality to have.
I did worry. I'm not sure I panicked, but it certainly was incredibly taxing mentally. And I realised that it was doing me more damage than good.
Right.
And it was pointless to fight. You can't run a program on a boat during a pandemic. I mean, it was illegal for a start. And I had a choice. I could say, well, I'm going to shut the whole thing down, go back to an office, then pick up my career again, or I could go on the search for a boat and go all in and pick myself up by the scruff of my neck and get on with things.
Wow, double down.
Well, what was clear from my efforts to replan the 2020 program was that you can't renegotiate charters with other people. When you're in such a fast-moving environment, restrictions are changing all the time. You might need to run the program in different places because restrictions are different in different places.
You needed flexibility.
I needed flexibility. Yeah. And the only way to make that possible was to have my own boat and stand on my own 2 feet. And, well, I mean, it gives me goosebumps to think at that moment, that was the productive sort of mental process. That
was the blessing of the time, if you were to have one.
Yeah.
Was that at this time when you knew you had the momentum going, you probably needed something to kick you into getting a boat for a start, or else you could have the comfort of just chartering for a couple of months of the year. But using this time to see, well, how can I turn this around and be productive? And actually, maybe, I guess it takes a long time to search for the right type of boat.
It does, yeah. No, I have an opinion on boats, and there were only 3 or 4 models which I was really interested in, and which I thought would fit my requirements for a boat that was strong and seaworthy, that was nice to sail, but was not inaccessible for beginners to sail, but not so easy that it was boring for me to sail. So it was quite a fit, quite a narrow definition, but also one that I could afford. I had massive constraints on finances. It was going to be a struggle to afford any boat, frankly, and you have to have a big enough boat, to have enough berths for people to join to make it a viable business model, really. So yeah, I went on the search, and of those 4 models, there was one I was particularly interested in, the Sigma 41, of which not many were built, and they're sought after. And I found one.
Where in the world was this?
And that was in Germany, yeah. And this was in July 2020, and I hopped on a flight at about the first moment you could possibly consider doing such a thing in the middle of a pandemic, and went and had a look, and it was quite clearly the boat for me, boat for us. It was in good condition. It was owned by an engineer who, it's a good sign, and it had the right accommodation. It was a beautiful boat. And it was a little more expensive than I thought was possible, really. But the owner, again, like the charity I'd worked with previously, liked my ideas and liked the fact I'd, flown all the way from England to have a look at this in a difficult environment. And he said, okay, there are other offers on the table, but I'll give you a week to get your act together and find the funding. And God, that was the most stressful week of my life. I begged my friends, I begged my family, I withdrew every penny I had, and due to the very generous support and belief of a lot of people, I went back a week later with a one-way ticket and a big rucksack, and not much of an idea of what I was going to do next. But the dream was alive. We had a boat, and you can work the rest out. Once you've got a boat, you can work the rest out.
Yeah.
So yeah, we sailed home.
Fantastic story, yeah.
Yeah, and I spent, then the pandemic reared its ugly head again, didn't it?
Right, yeah.
We didn't expect to lose 2 years. And I think had I known that, I probably wouldn't have had the guts to go ahead with it.
Yeah.
Because then I had this boat, which had cost me literally every penny and then some, which was illegal to use.
Mm-hmm.
But I did spend a lot of time, solitary time, doing it up, of getting it ready for its new life as the platform for Sail Britain's community. It was in good condition, but it had to have various modifications for its regulations, UK Maritime Coast Guard Agency regulations, and that was something that kept me off the streets all winter. So yeah, kept me busy.
Yeah, one man and his boat.
Yeah, one man and his boat. It would have been a process I would have shared with lots of others. People are dying to help out, but I couldn't. So it has to be done more or less on my own. And then we set off. And 2021 was pretty stressful, changing regulations. The program had to be changed 2 days before we set off. Massive, we had to cancel half of it and move it to Cornwall from Scotland due to the different regulations and the sort of lack of end dates and things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the process of the last 3 years have left me exhausted, but also optimistic that with the right dedication, you can get through difficult times. And crucially, with the support of a community and the sort of joyful nature of that particular community, it's been a good experience.
Yeah, I think when you always look back at the pandemic, it's hard to see kind of for a lot of people, hard to see any real gains in their life. But I suppose when you really think about it, there are these small things that kind of we all maybe did at the time, which were maybe coping mechanisms. And you had your boat to work on.
Yeah,
that's what got you through that. And if you didn't have that, it wouldn't have been the same experience.
And I recognise I'm lucky, to have had a coping mechanism. I think a lot of people didn't, and the lasting impact of that is going to be profoundly heavy for society going forwards. But I had a dream I was working towards, and what I was doing was illegal to do, so I couldn't do it. So I may as well get on with something else, and that gave me the time to dream and the time to get on with, what I needed for the future. So I had an end goal really, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic story. You and your boat. And I think if that's going to be something that's going to be part of your life for the next few years, then it's great to have had that moment with it, that relationship with it.
And what was particularly nice was to see it become the community boat, because I'd had this sort of solo relationship with it for 9 months. But then to finally have other people coming on board and for it to be doing what it was meant to do in life was, it's a wonderful moment.
Yeah. Well, let's talk through your programs, what you offer on Sail Britain. Many of it, I suppose, kind of is a way of getting people onto the ocean and reconnecting with nature in some sense. Tell us about the things that you offer, the programs that you run.
So the program runs during the UK sailing season.
Which is
end of April to late September, really. And it's 15, 20 weeks. And
are these 1 week periods?
Mostly 1 week periods. Occasionally we do special projects which are longer or shorter than that.
Yeah.
But a week is a sort of sensible amount of time that someone can take off work to join. It keeps the cost manageable. And it just seems a sensible format. And then we have changeovers at weekends, and one crew leaves the boat, another crew joins. And I stop for breaks occasionally, but it's very hard work, certainly.
Yeah.
But it's so we run a variety of different projects throughout the summer. Throughout all of them is ocean engagement. We need to learn more about the ocean. We need to rekindle or develop our relationship with the ocean and have a greater personal understanding of the importance of the sea. And we do this through, trips which are directly about connecting with nature. So we meet people who are, we go to marine protected areas. We meet local people who are championing the cause of the ocean. We go and snorkel in the seagrass to see, all the amazing creatures which live in such habitats. And then we run artist residencies as well for more creative inspiration, which have become an increasingly interesting part of the program.
And what does that involve?
In a practical sense, it's not that different, really. It's about more the people who come along. I think artists use residencies to develop their own practices and use it as a sort of research trip, really, to inspire further work.
Yeah, and have a place of focus, I suppose, which is also important.
Indeed, yes, and also to work with others. I think it's very important that you have a very inspiring community on board, and that's something which we've always been very lucky to have. And I love working with artists. I'm from a creative background myself, and I love the way artists think. And if we all applied a more creative approach to life, it would be a very good thing. So that's a very nice part of the program. And then there are weeks which are open to everybody. It's really important that the project is open to everybody. So you don't have to be an artist, you don't have to be a scientist, you don't have to have even much of an interest yet in the ocean. But what you need to have is a keenness to go on an adventure and have a team spirit.
And I suppose crucially as well, you don't have to be a sailor, which is not a prerequisite at all.
Important question. Yeah, you don't have to be a sailor. So I, in my free time when I was working as an architect, also was volunteering as a sailing instructor. So I had a sailing instructor certificate and used to run day skipper courses with my university. So I had to go and volunteer at weekends, take some undergrads out, get them their day skipper, and then go back to the office in the week.
How many people are you having on a boat per program?
So Merlin sleeps 9 maximum, and we usually run with a crew of 3. So many people have said that's daft on a boat that size in terms of just economics. But I think it's very important that
daft is in too many or too little?
Too little. When you've got so few berths on board, you need to be filling every one with a paying guest. I think it's really important to have 2 full-time crew members. That's myself, usually as skipper, plus a first mate. And but a third crew member, which is what some people think is daft, is an expert. It's the trip leader. Now that expedition leader might be an artist for example.
So there might not be a sailor.
No, there's no
No.
need for them to be a sailor.
Yeah.
They run the program, or they don't run the program. They facilitate the program with us.
Yeah.
So they bring some kind of expertise, which, I myself know a fair amount about the ocean, but I'm no expert. And it's great to have someone who knows much more about marine ecosystems, about processes and whatever, to come on board for, say, our Reconnecting with Nature trip this year is run with a marine biologist on board. So if people really want to get nitty gritty about the ocean to an extent that I'm, not qualified to say, then, having our trip leader is a very important person on board.
Yeah.
And it allows people to get much greater diversity out of the trip.
Which is everything. Is what you're about. Is what not having
Indeed.
that single-minded approach and saying like, I can still learn yourself, because this is why you get the experts on board, because it's also fulfilling for you to learn from them as well.
I mean, no one's learned more than I have, I'll tell you that. And that's been a very joyful thing. So that's the program. It's very diverse. We run, each trip has a slightly different focus. So whether it's art, whether it's nature engagement, we've got one this year running on sea myths and legends with a writer and a poet as our expedition leader. That's going to be a new one, but rich ground for exploration.
Yeah.
So it's sailing plus a bit, and I think that's what sets our program apart.
Yeah, no better place to tell a story as well, when kind of everyone's captivated on a boat. Yeah. So you've got potentially 7 people who have never sailed in their life. But do they need to, is it an all hands on approach with every person on board?
Yeah, absolutely.
So they all have to chip in some sense. So
Yeah.
there's an element of training you have to give them.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you get someone who's perhaps not so physically able. We've had some quite elderly people joining us on some occasions. And as I said, it's open to all. And I'm not going to turn someone away unless there's a safety issue.
Yeah.
But, everyone pulls as much as they can. And with a crew of that size, you're never left understaffed, undercrewed. So, we take it easy. The first few days is about getting familiar with the boat, with learning about how it all works, with getting to know each other and adjusting from that sort of, that land life to the water life and seeing the world a bit differently. And the more the week progresses, the more people get familiar with all the sort of mystery of how the sails work. And they need less and less instructing, and then my role becomes less involved.
It must be an incredible experience to see these people coming on board who may not have any experience with traveling by boat and literally showing them the ropes, but also seeing them progress their skills in sailing, but also the social skills of and of being together and starting as strangers and leaving probably as great friends, because they've had to spend so much time together on such in a close environment.
Indeed, I think it's a very intense environment. It's one which necessitates people working very closely together, and that develops friendships. People often remain friends. I mean, I've met some of my closest friends on boats, and it's really nice when crews stay in touch and have meetups in the winter and, have conversations. I'm part of, the old WhatsApp group, which is going years later from people who've connected on board, and that's a beautiful thing to see. But in terms of skills as well, it's usually sort of midway Wednesday, Thursday in the week when the first mate and I can quietly go down to the galley and make tea for everyone, and no one realizes that the skipper is not on deck anymore. But I'm completely aware of what's going on, and I can see out the windows, and I've got the nav station there. And it's a lovely moment just to leave the crew to it, because they know what they're doing. They don't need me there at that point. And, I can tell if something needs my attention or not. And I do it very carefully. But it's lovely to be able to give people that freedom and that moment to say, well, here we are.
Yeah, a huge sense of accomplishment.
Incredible sense of accomplishment. I think that's, the sort of a sensitivity in leadership to the team is vitally important on a boat.
Yeah. Some people can think that being on a boat can be not a pleasant experience with constant movement with the British weather that we have. Is it like that?
Not nearly as much as people think, actually. Yeah, I barely remember the bad days. Occasionally, it's a bit rough. Occasionally, people who are new to it will feel a bit seasick, but it's usually not beyond the first day. Then you get your sea legs, and you work out. Your brain works out what's going on, and from that point on, it's fun. But I think the lovely thing about sailing in the Isles, in Scotland particularly, is they get far less rain than the mainland does. The weather is often a lot better. And with such a three-dimensional coastline as we have in the British Isles, there's always somewhere to hide, and there's plenty of other things to do. We carry a small science lab on board with nets, plankton nets, microscopes, hydrophones. So, there's lots to do if the weather's not conducive to being out in the open. And there's no point, making things uncomfortable for people. So, sometimes a down day is quite nice to explore the coast, to explore the shore, getting the dinghy go ashore and having to climb the nearest hill. Or,
yeah. Just having that flexibility to know.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, the beauty of always traveling close to land, because you always have that option.
Yeah. That's what really the sort of intersection between land and sea is where the most interest is, I think.
Let's talk about our British coastline. There are many places, like you said, in the world that you could sail. It gets progressively harder the further you go. But, I mean, there are warmer lands, there are warmer seas, there are warmer temperatures. Why have you committed to focusing on British coastline?
This is a really important, fundamental question, actually, for me and for Sail Britain. And that's why it's called Sail Britain. I was astonished during my 6 months off when I saw a lot of my own country, how beautiful it is. Everyone thinks you have to fly to the far side of the world to find adventure, but actually adventure is a state of mind, really. And we should be keenly aware of the impact that flying to the far side of the world has. And adventure is right on our doorstep if we want it. It's just having the courage to go a short distance rather than a long one. So it's more accessible. It keeps the cost down as well. Traveling to the coast in the UK is not too difficult. And I think it's really important to champion the place you have close to home. We're in a much better position to preserve our nature than we are in some faraway place where we don't understand the cultural context or the environmental context. If we can't do it here, we need to be championing it here. We live in a geographically, socially diverse country with incredible wildlife, and most people don't know that. So I didn't know that. It was a surprise to me. And
what's it like? What's it like sailing the British coastline? What have you experienced?
That's an almost impossible question to answer.
To someone who hasn't, other than the odd ferry.
Well, it's incredibly diverse. If you look at a geological map of the British Isles, you'll see that the underlying geology is incredibly, diverse from one place to another. We've got the sort of low-lying marshes and sandy creeks, muddy creeks of the East Coast and East Anglia. And then there's the chalk cliffs of the South Coast and the rocky shores of the West Coast and the whole of the British Isles. And each one has its own special ecosystems. It has its own histories and communities and its own life. And of course, the people who live there are a big part of that. We are a crowded island. We are very much part of our own nature, and have to coexist with that. So I think there's a huge amount to explore for a start. And there's proper wilderness here. Some of the wildest places I've ever been have been here in the British Isles. And of course, having a boat allows you to access the places you can't by land, perhaps. But people might be surprised, actually, at the wilderness we have in places like Cornwall. During 2021, our programme was entirely on the south coast of England, mostly in Cornwall. And I was trying to seek out the places which weren't overrun by everyone else because we were, confined.
Yeah, typically you think of Cornwall and the coastline there. It's just very touristy.
Yeah,
lots of people.
Yeah, but there are places which are, we didn't see a single soul. And yes, a lot of other people were sailing there as well, and some of the more popular spots were very busy. But like places like the south corner of St Austell Bay, beautiful wild cliffs. It could be the south of France. Crystal clear water, beautiful beaches, no one on them because the cliffs are there and you can't get down. So yeah, I enjoy seeking out the wild as well.
Is there more you need to explore of the UK? Is it still surprise you?
Oh yeah.
Are you still in new places?
Yeah, I mean, there's far more than you could explore in a lifetime. There are the favourite places I keep returning to, but
And which of those for you?
Well, I mean, the Western Isles of Scotland. I think the wildlife's incredible.
And this is where your programs are based.
Mostly
this year. I've seen photos of what that looks like. It just looks like an absolute dream.
Yeah, the Western Isles are, in my view, some of the best sailing in Europe. Some of the best sailing I've ever done. And the weather isn't as bad as people say it is during the summertime. And the wildlife is all around you. There's dramatic scenery. And there's no one there, It's, if you want to get away from it all, and be under your own steam, there's a real sense of adventure in that respect. And thousands and thousands of miles of coastline to explore, lots of islands.
And an insane, I was looking at the numbers, there's an incredible amount of islands that we have in the British Isles. Most, in fact, are uninhabited.
Indeed, yeah.
And probably inaccessible to many people.
Yeah.
Unless they have a boat, which is where I guess your speciality is, because you can take people to places which they would otherwise not get to. Yeah,
and some of these places are very important for wildlife, so you've got to be quite careful, where and how you land and what you do when you land on those islands. But it's a real privilege in some places where you can sort of safely interact with wildlife colonies, bird colonies, seal colonies. The seas are rich in marine life. You got dolphins, whales surrounding us. Another whale. That's a bit old hat for me.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, let's talk about some of the wildlife. Is there a moment when you just when you encountered wildlife that you just was a very special instance?
Yeah.
Any stories you can share?
It never gets old. I think marine mammals in particular there's something about their charisma which is just very, very special. We'll see dolphins almost every week, sometimes on a daily basis. And the first time when you've got a new crew out and the dolphins arrive, everything stops. You have to sort of batten down the hatches for half an hour while everyone shrieks and whoops and goes and sits on the bow and plays with the dolphins. And they, they're very intelligent creatures and they interact with us. And being a sailing boat, we haven't got the noise pollution which other boats generate. So dolphins never get old. That's always a joy. But the whales are actually very breathtaking, and we do have see whales.
Which types
frequently.
of whales?
Mostly minke whales in Scotland, but we've also seen others. A particularly memorable occasion was in Loch Craignish, which is one of the inner sea lochs, not so far from Oban, actually. It was a very calm evening. The sea was glassy calm, and the sunset was going down in flaming colours. It was gorgeous. And we had a whale breaching really quite close to the boat. And it was a northern bottlenose whale, which are not often seen in Hebrides. They're quite rare. So that was a very special sighting, and in such conditions, it was a profoundly beautiful moment, and I think that kind of facilitating that kind of nature connection, if you can, is so important.
Yeah. It's one thing to see something like that on TV and understand its importance, but actually to physically be there, to hear the sounds, smell that air, it's something different, I imagine. Yeah.
And you see this magic with the BBC's latest, David Attenborough's Wild Isles.
Yes.
And it's wowing everybody. And I think it's opening eyes as well to what we have here.
It sounds incredible. I'm the fact that you choose to focus on the British Isles, I think, is incredible. Something I really love championing. And as I have got older and travelled around further parts of the UK, I've really myself learned to appreciate just how diverse it is and what it has to offer from, like you said, like the rocky shores of Cornwall and the incredible beaches and the clear water there. The fact that we have like a lake district, we have peaks and mountains, and the fact that we are always so close to the coast, which actually, for many people in the world who are in a landlocked area, don't even have the experience of being near tidal water. And that's just something that I never really considered until I was speaking to someone in Germany when they were right down in the south and they just couldn't have easy access to the sea.
Yeah, it's a great privilege, and I think it's often surprising to people when I say some of the most beautiful places I've ever been are in Essex. You know, the tidal creeks of North Essex and Suffolk are really unassuming. The land is flat, fairly featureless, but waking up, you know, on maybe a misty autumn morning with the tide silently slipping by the boat, and you've got the calls of the seabirds and the curlews and the oyster catchers around the boat. It's just profoundly beautiful. And it's right on our doorstep. You know, it's what, hour from London.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's all about appreciating where you are here and now.
Yeah.
I guess I want to move on to the state of our oceans and talk about some of the things that you do to help educate people whilst on your program. What can you tell me about where the state of our oceans is now?
I think, you know, ocean engagement being a, you know, founding principle of what Sail Britain does, this is, of course, incredibly topical. We have a huge impact on the oceans, and the oceans have a huge impact on us. And I think it's only quite recently that that's becoming starkly visible. It's also...
In what way? What impact does the ocean have on us on land? Educate me.
Right. Well, for me, I think the big one is climate change. The ocean is absolutely critical in our fight against climate change. And we are having profound impacts upon it as a result.
Is this to do with the rising sea temperatures?
This is to do with multiple. There are three main things. It's to do with the climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. And these are the three things which the United Nations have picked up on as, you know, global problems. But if we look at the first one, climate change, the ocean is the world's greatest heat sink. It's also the world's greatest carbon sink. So it's absorbed about 25% of the emissions, the carbon emissions emitted by humans since the Industrial Revolution.
25%.
25%. But it's also absorbed 90% of the heat. So all those greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are generating a lot more heat, and the ocean is absorbing that heat. Think of it, there was some research done in 2007 which indicated that it was estimated that without the oceans, the effects of anthropogenic climate change would have resulted in a 36-degree rise in global temperatures. So that would have meant that in the space of 200 years, we would have made the Earth completely uninhabitable. 36 degrees. Now, we're pushing 1.5 at the moment. This is the first sort of worrying milestone. But 36 degrees, you know, that is completely unthinkable. We would have destroyed the world already had we not had the ocean as a heat sink. But the ocean is warming fast. And I think just this week there's a report about, you know, record ocean temperatures this year, this March. And that has profound impacts on marine ecosystems, coral reefs particularly. You know, we are at 1.5 degrees, we are going to be losing 70 to 90% of the world's coral reefs due to bleaching and other problems. At 2 degrees, we lose 99%. So they're virtually gone.
Wow.
And coral reefs, you know, are responsible for 25% of the ocean's biodiversity.
Right, and you lose the coral, and that has an impact up the food chain.
Exactly. The coral reefs provide habitats for a vast array of other creatures, which have huge impacts, and yet they're like 0.1% of the ocean's area, but they've got 25% of biodiversity. But also, the ocean contains 95% of the Earth's biome anyway. And yet it's so unexplored. We don't really know what's down there, and yet we're talking about deep ocean mining, which will have catastrophic effects on biodiversity. The problem has been governance, really. Just this week, we've had some very positive news about the Global Oceans Treaty, which will then be able to enforce, at least bring people around the same table to enforce ideas about protecting the ocean, and crucially the 30 by 30 commitment, which was made at the UN Biodiversity Summit. But yes, the carbon dioxide is making the oceans more acidic, which is again a big problem for creatures which build their bodies from calcium, which shells are mostly calcium. Mm-hmm. So anything with a shell-based structure, or the bones will become weaker. Plankton might suffer. Food chains will move. The rising temperatures and increasing meltwater will result in potential changes to ocean currents. And the southern hemisphere is warming at a faster rate than the northern hemisphere, and that's undercutting the Antarctic Antarctic ice shelves, which is very, very worrying for sea level rise.
It's like these are all playing into each other.
Yeah,
it's like
there's
a compound
multiple
effect.
Feedback loops, multiple interactions between different problems.
If we lose our biodiversity, a vast majority of it, under the ocean, what implications does that have on us?
Well, I mean, billions of people around the world rely upon the ocean for their primary source of protein. So we lose, just on a human impact, there's huge, profound impact on people's lives and livelihoods. But sea level rise is going to inundate many coastal communities in which billions of people live, and we're going to have mass migration on land, wars, conflicts, whatever. But I also don't want to get too much into the doom and gloom.
Yeah, we're slipping into the doom here.
So it's vitally important that we change our relationship with the ocean. All of these problems currently are within our ability to fix.
Right. There is positives.
We have the tools and the wherewithal to do it. We just need the will. And it's very heartening to look back, 20 years ago, currently about just over 6% of the world's ocean is protected. That is 10 times as much as it was in 2000. So things are moving very rapidly. Climate change and the tipping points are also rapidly approaching, but we have the wherewithal to tackle that. Renewable energy is booming around the world, and it can go faster if governments were to pull a thumb out and stop fossil fuel subsidies and things like that. There are policies we can change which would profoundly impact the future. It is possible. But the first thing is about loving the ocean. We need to realize that it's important, but we need to love it personally. Until we engage with something, until we value it ourselves, we're unlikely to have a personal stake in it.
Because this is the importance of having the engagement with it in the first place, because to many people, the ocean is out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah.
And for those who do experience ocean, typically it's just seeing water.
Yeah.
An expanse of water.
Yeah.
And not understanding what lies below the water, what's happening to the water.
Yeah. Politically, it's the classic tragedy of the commons. It's something, the high seas are a free-for-all, more or less, and it's in no one's individual interest to protect them over personal gain. But it's nice to see that beginning to change now with the Global Oceans Treaty. But as far as what we can do as individuals, and what I'm doing as an individual, and what the Sail Britain community is doing, is to engage people. So this is why we have, we do beach cleans in remote places and bring back sacks of plastic from remote islands and pop them into places where they can be disposed. We've also fed that data to people like Surfers Against Sewage who need the data, working with local reps in Scotland. Plastic pollution is obviously something I've not touched on. It's a big issue for the oceans, it's a big issue for land, but it's not something I'm concentrating on so much. I think for me personally, the climate is the more difficult problem because it's so difficult to quantify. So a way, we carry a microplastics net on board, which is essentially a very, very fine mesh.
And these microplastics, is plastic that's dumped into the ocean. It's how it kind of breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces. It never disappears.
Never really disappears.
It just gets smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
And so, how small? When you talk about microplastics, how small are we talking?
I think we're talking less than 5 millimeters.
So it's essentially something you can feel in your hands.
Yeah, sometimes.
And smaller.
And smaller. So actually, in Scotland, where there's not that much in the way of big population centres on the west coast, not above the Mull of Kintyre anyway, we don't see a huge amount of household waste, which you get in lots of other places. But something we always find is fibres, microfibres. These come from wastewater primarily. When you wash your clothes, little and which are, plastic-based nylon or whatever. Little fibres come out and wash into the wastewater streams. They bypass filters, and they just break down into smaller and smaller pieces. And we often find these in the water.
As Lester talked about, the state of our clothing and how we wash.
Yeah. Also, car tyres are a big problem because they're made of synthetic rubber, plastic-based rubber. And every time you hit the brakes, a little bit comes off in abrasion on the road.
Yeah.
So that's a big problem, and that goes straight into the drains beside the roads. But some of the most interesting things we've pulled up in the net has been the life that's in the ocean. So you don't just catch microplastics; you catch plankton. You catch all manner of tiny creatures.
Yeah.
And that's always what inspires people when you get it under the microscope and you have these up on the screen. We plug it into an iPad, and people can then, the whole crew can see what's going on under the microscope.
So you're seeing like a close up of microplastics, alongside plankton, like so life and plastic.
We see the two interacting on screen. We see, we've seen. Well, it's all what we're seeing is not really visible to the naked eye. You can see that it's a bit of a soup in the dish, but what the microscope brings out is a detail. And you can see the delicacy of these tiny creatures, and these are the base of all marine food chains. And how that, you can imagine that small increases in ocean acidity, for example, are going to have an impact.
Huge impact on a tiny creature like that, yeah.
Yeah, so that's going to collapse food chains potentially. And that's a climate thing. So visualizing climate change is one of the more difficult environmental challenges out there. And this is a really good way in to giving people a personal connection with the impact that we're going to have. When you see something is so delicate and so fragile and so beautiful, and you realize that this is under threat, then I think people come back a bit changed after that. And not just in a negative way. I think people are worried, but they've got a reason to be hopeful because, these are things we can fix.
You said, I've read something that you wrote. You said we all need to be ocean ambassadors, and we all have something meaningful to contribute.
Yeah.
What do you mean by we can all contribute? What can we do?
Well, there's lots of things we can do. Many of them have to be done at a society level, but there's also personal things which you can change in your own lives. I mean, we all need to drastically reduce emissions. There are lots of ways you can do that. Just start really basic. Do you need to put, most people overfill their kettles and use 3 times as much energy as they need. A kettle's quite a high energy device. You could be more efficient there. Think about efficiency.
It's so basic. And it's something like that, if collectively everyone did, would make huge differences, which I guess is a theme for lots of things you can do.
Indeed, yeah. I think some of the most big, important, profound challenges that societies have faced have started at a personal level. And it also gives a sense of ownership of that. If you can personally feel you're, making a small difference, however small it is, it does something to your psychology. And you can then scale that up and be part of a community, join a local action group or something. Choose things which have less packaging. Demand that less packaging is used. Dump it on the supermarket, unpack it on the conveyor belt if you want. These are all meaningful things we can do, but political pressure is very important, and these, politics is how, things are going to be able to changed drastically in a very short while. So bodies like the UN are particularly important for that. But yeah, I think on every scale, it's we have now solar panels on our boat so that we can generate most of our electricity needs renewably, whereas before we were running the engine to generate electricity from the diesel power. So that's been a nice thing that we could do on a community level, and it's definitely reduced our diesel consumption. We've got through less as a result, and with lower emissions.
Yeah, there's always something you can do, but it's whether it's accessible.
Yeah,
and this is why I think it's having things come from a government level to help everyone, because when it comes to costs, people are going to choose the cheapest option if that is something that's plastic wrapped.
Yeah.
Or if the fuel is cheaper than buying an electric car or waiting for time for the car to charge.
Yeah.
So much needs to be put in place to make things easier and cheaper and affordable.
Yeah.
And a lot of that stuff we can't do, but can we? Because it's all in our political choices.
Yeah, I mean, there's a
difficult one.
Thorny discussions, but and yes, I think there's a real issue that sustainability is a middle class privilege in so many ways, and I think we need to be keenly aware of that, and that's where top down stuff does help. The regulation would help, but I think being mindful is something everybody can do, and collectively that will make a difference.
You taught me a new word last week when we were chatting about this. Anthropocene, if I said it correctly.
Yeah.
Which is I had never actually come across. I guess from what I interpret it, it's about describing our current present time in geological terms. A time when human activity has started to make a significant impact on the planet's climate and ecosystems. And I think researching this, there was some debate as to when this period of life started, whether it was to do with the Industrial Revolution, but I think it's more agreed that actually it's come more recently in 1950s, around the time of atomic bomb tests.
Yeah.
Going forward into what I've also learned is a period called the Great Acceleration.
Yeah,
which just describes the dramatic increase in human activity affecting the planet. This, I guess, we're arriving at a special point here where we are in this period of great acceleration. We have huge populations. We have limited resources. But we aren't probably managing those resources sustainably with the growth that we're on. What do we do?
Well, I think you're probably not the only person to be asking that question. I think, the Anthropocene is an interesting concept. And, the world's geological epochs have been, they're often, demarcated by profound changes in the world's structure, its atmosphere, its geology, life on Earth. And if you look on a the 4.6 billion years or so of the Earth's existence, we have come along very, very recently, and we've had a profound impact of the likes that has never been seen before in an incredibly short time, and we need to be very worried about that. But I think, yes, we're learning fast as well, and we need to be, we need to accept we have profoundly changed the atmosphere through our atomic testing, and they because of the extra radiation that's in the atmosphere, modern steel making is sometimes unsuitable for certain scientific instruments, and they have to dredge up steel from sunken ships from the pre-atomic era to get steel which is not subject to this in the smelting process.
That's crazy.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the air we breathe is different. The rocks that are now being laid down contain plastic, I think I read somewhere that in the harbours of northern Germany, where the Rhine comes out, the sediments in the harbour there, because it drains such a huge basin, is up to 15% plastic. Because all those fibres and the waste, which is washed down the river and then settles in the basins, that's just going to directly affect the geology. So yeah, it's an interesting concept, and it's one we need to, it runs it home just how much we've impacted the earth. What do we do about it? Well, I mean, in addition to the things I've mentioned in the climate, we need to be thinking about resources. We need to aim for a circular, renewable economy rather than the sort of linear GDP-focused economies that we have, which have proved so incredibly damaging. But there are lots of interesting ideas there. There are lots of wonderful organisations working for the circular economy. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation is doing very interesting things.
Just this week or last week, there was a story of people litter picking, and they found just a marathon bar wrapper.
Yeah.
I think it was in the region of 30 years old.
Yeah.
And you look at what chocolate bars are wrapped in today.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
And you're just thinking, if that is still intact 30 years later, what are we leaving for our next generation?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm probably just about old enough to remember beaches which weren't littered in plastic. And it's sad to think that, my children, or even people who are older than my children, people who are alive now, will never really have experienced a beach which is pristine. I mean, of course, there are places where the currents take it away, but the reality is still there, and that's a very sad thing.
Yeah. Don't want to end it on doom and gloom. I want to bring it back to your Sail Britain, which I think is an absolutely fabulous program, and I'm really chuffed that we can talk about it and hopefully inspire others and maybe even get people on board your boat. You've certainly inspired me to one day maybe make a trip with you. I read something that a girl called Hannah Close wrote. I would first of all, I'd direct people to her blog she wrote, which is beautifully written. I think her website, hannahclose.com, I think. But as I was reading this the other day, I just got a little snippet and I wanted to read it to you today. She said, this is describing the experience that she had on your boat. She said, "We became an island of 9, entirely codependent on each other. We were entangled so beautifully in so many ways. There was no back door, nowhere to hide. We saw each other for who we really were in situations that create challenge and pressure. And this was the alchemy, the magic." I thought that was just a beautiful way to describe kind of what you provide.
I think that is a very beautiful and very touching thing to hear. And I've often struggled with translating what it's like to be with another bunch of people out in the wild on a boat into something which you can convey to someone in conversation or, over dinner or something. And the magic is often a word I use, and I can't explain it. I just have to say it's magic. And you have to accept it's not, you can't convey everything in words. Sometimes you've got to add your emotions. You've got to be there yourself. You've got to try it. You've got to be open-minded about trying these new things and putting yourself in a new situation. And I try to do that as often as I can, and I try to encourage others to as well. And Hannah's leading our creative ecology residency this summer, and we're going to be exploring many of the things which we've talked about in this podcast episode. The magic is the most special thing about it, and it's something I can't quantify. It's something few of our guests, Hannah's a notable exception, I think, can quantify, but it's hopefully something which people feel and which they will keep for the future and which they can bring back to land and maybe share with others.
I think it's quite easy in life to kind of live behind closed doors in the safety of your home, your flat, your apartment, and forget about interacting with people. I remember the time when I lived in an apartment block and just didn't really know my neighbours, and we would share the same corridor together. And it wasn't until one of them knocked on our door once that you actually broke down those barriers, and actually we developed a great relationship together. But sometimes you need to be forced to do that. It's so easy to kind of get into your own comfort zone and to do things your own way and to live in a place that you feel comfortable with. But it's not until you throw a mix of people together and they're forced to have to interact that they see how human each other are and what they can offer to each other.
Yeah. We humans are, we're social creatures, aren't we? And I think so many of the processes and systems that we've developed for ourselves are profoundly inhuman. And, what I would say that offices, are a profoundly inhuman way of working. I've always had, good fortune to work in offices which were really nice, and my colleagues were always perfectly nice. But I think we need greater opportunity to be human and to interact and to allow that sort of social curiosity to come out. Sail Britain is just my way of doing it.
I think it's a wonderful program, and I'm really glad that you've been able to share with us what you are all about. And I think I hope that it continues for many years and provides wonderful opportunities for people from all different backgrounds to have their experience with nature.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to share it with you all.
Thank you very much.